we have another exceptional speaker, Theresa-Marie Rhyne. Theresa is visualization expert who specialized in applying choral theory to data visualizations. Within her astonishing career, Theresa was working with multiple well-known visualization groups, such as Visualization Group at Stanford University, the Center for Visualization at the University of California, or Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute at the University of Utah. She founded 2 visualization centers, the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Scientific Visualization Center and the Center for Visualization and Analytics at North Carolina State University. And if you have not yet do so, I would really recommend you to reading her book, Applying Color Theory to Digital Media and Visualization, as it is very interesting reading. I could continue listing her accomplishment the whole day, but let's rather hear what Theresa has prepared for us in her talk about the color fundamentals for data visualization. Theresa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to try to get on with it if I can do this. Okay. I hope I can get this. I hope you can see my screen. Let's play a little bit of Keynote. All right, here we go. So I'm going to talk about color fundamentals today, and we're going to review some color models, look at some color theory, talk a little bit about color gamut and spaces. I'm going to tell you about a new one, and I'm going to give you 10 simple rules for you to leave with to help you colorize. Okay, so let's look again at something that we're all familiar with. The key color models. They're red, green, and blue. That's what we see on our display systems with lights. We have cyan, magenta, yellow, and key black, and that's what we use for printing. And for those who don't know, the reason there is a K called the key black is because people found very early in printing that there was more black than there was color in a particular piece of paper. And so if they tried to make cyan, magenta, and yellow make the black, there was so much ink on the paper that the paper fell apart. So it became CMYK, where the K mean the key black that you register your color by. Okay, red, yellow, and blue is the first color model that most of us learned when we were in kindergarten, and that's how we mix paints. And it's been probably around for a very, very long time, centuries. All right, if we were in a perfect world, red, green, and blue would map perfectly what we see on our display systems, our visualizations on our red, green, and blue would map perfectly to our color system. Well, that doesn't work when we try to print. This is an image from my book. So here I designed it in RGB color space, but when I go into printing CMYK, we get a sort of a duller version. And that's typical, many of you have already experienced that when you publish. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about how the color wheel came into being. Sir Isaac Newton is the first person to find a concept called the color circle. So he had some early experiments with prisms where he was looking at the rainbow. And then he wrote in 1666 a concept called the color wheel. Now look very carefully at the color wheel and you will notice there's a little gap between violet and red. That is because magenta was not originally a spectral color that Newton saw in his prism experiments. It would not be until the 1800s when Goethe put magenta on the color wheel, and it has stayed there ever since. So this is an important concept to sort of understand. Okay, we have another expert named Chevreul who was working with fabric and textiles, and he discovered something called simultaneous contrast, which is something you want to remember in your visualization. And that is if you have two strong hues that are complementary to each other, you can create some very vibrating colors. You can, if you look at the circles in front of you, it's almost very difficult to look at. And I show you over here a visualization that becomes very difficult to look at the bar charts because the hues are of the same value at their maximum saturation. And it creates, well, we could call it good vibrations or bad vibrations, however you want it. But this is something you want to remember in your visualizations. You don't want your hues to precisely match each other at their highest intensity. By the way, that's called a complementary color. So let's get on to color harmonies. Color harmony is a concept that's very based in the graphic design industry. And monochromatic is one color where if you add a little white, you get a tint, add a little gray, you get a tone, and add a little black, you get a shade. Now you will see this monochromatic scheme used quite a bit in visualization, and I'll explain it to you why a little bit later. Analogous is 3 or 4 colors that are next to each other in the color wheel. Here I'm using Adobe Color, so it's going to automatically generate 5 colors. So I'm in a key color of cyan, and I'm creating 2 colors on one side of it and 2 colors on the other side to create an analogous color adjacent to each other. This is used a great deal in fashion design. Complementary colors are 2 colors that oppose each other on the color wheel. So here I am in the key of cyan, and my opposing color is going to be orange. Now, we can use this a lot in visualization. It turns out for data visualization, a tool called Color Brewer, which is many of you I hope have used, is an excellent resource. It's funded by the National Science Foundation. It was developed by Cynthia Brewer and Mark Harrer at Pennsylvania State University. They developed a series of color schemes called sequential color schemes, diverging color schemes, and qualitative color schemes. In the interest of this talk, I don't have a lot of time. I'm not going to cover qualitative color schemes, but I'm going to show you some things about how color harmony relates to sequential and diverging color schemes. Now, qualitative color schemes are color schemes like if you were going to map all the objects in your kitchen, say, or all the objects in your laboratory, and you wanted to do a diagram and you wanted each color to be distinctive, not somehow related to each other, you would create a color scheme where they were all distinctive elements. Sequential and diverging have a relationship to each other in their data. So I'm going to move on and show you this. So there is a situation where I have recently written about it, where the color harmony field, which is part of graphic design, and the data color schemes are sort of separate. Color harmony is a field of something used in design. Data color schemes is something used in data visualization. So I've recently described a way to integrate the 2 together. So if we have a monochromatic color scheme and you're talking to a graphic designer that's going to be printing your publication, you have a single hue sequential data set, let's say you use that in Color Brewer, and you have 1 hue, and you built that tint, tone, and shade concept that I said to you, and you have a blue sequential color scheme. That is also a monochromatic color scheme, but in a systematic order. If you have multi-hues, so that translates into an analogous color scheme with your graphic designer. So people in graphic design, you have colors that build on each other, that are next to each other on the color wheel. I show you in this detail here a sequential color scheme from Color Brewer right here, and you'll see it's doing a progression across it, but it is actually analogous to each other. That's an analogous, that's a multi-hue sequential color scheme. So now here's the exciting one, the complementary color scheme. That is diverging color. That is actually 2 sequential color schemes combined together, and with the middle color being white. And so what we have is the data set splits apart. This is a particular diverging color scheme. Now, a common diverging color scheme is to actually use a complementary color scheme in the color harmony world. So here I show that here. These 2, one of them was created, this was created in Adobe, and this was created in Color Brewer, this was created in Adobe Color. This Adobe Color automatically generated this complementary color scheme. You'll see Color Brewer is automatically generating this, and they're both really considered complementary and diverging, however you want to call it. All right, now one of the big challenges, and Tamara Munster alerted to this a little bit yesterday in her talk about color, she mentioned Chroma and Luminance, and she mentioned that there was a perceptual uniformity issue with regards to working with the rainbow color map. And I'm going to describe that a little bit more in detail, and I'm going to show you 2 perceptual uniform color spaces. One's Munsell, and the other one is Hue Chroma Luminance. Now, for those of you who've been using Color Brewer for a long time, it turns out Cynthia Brewer based her work on the Munsell color system. So it is a perceptual uniform color system. You didn't know you were doing it all along, but she was doing it. In terms of Hue Chroma Luminance, this is gaining more popularity in the visualization field. So I'm going to cover that a little bit today. So let's look at Munsell. So the Munsell color system is based on something called hue, value, chroma. So in Munsell's world, he needed to come up with orders of 10 steps. That's how he wanted to do it. So he did red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. He eliminated, traditionally, it was 6 principal hues, with orange being in it. So he eliminated that and he said red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. Then he created, to double that, he got 10 steps. Now what he wanted to create is what is called, I'll call it a beach ball. He wanted to create a spherical color model in 3 dimensions where value went from at the bottom was black and you went all the way to the top, you got white. Chroma was measured radially outward with each slice. And then your strongest colors were at the edge. So here he is. Now he decides, okay, I got to conduct some perceptual studies with people to see what's going on, what my data is. Well, he had a big surprise. I show you the globe that he wanted, and this is what happened when he conducted the experiments. It turns out that humans see a wider range of red and orange hues than they do blue and green hues. So he cannot get a regular shape like a sphere to describe color perception. And that's why you're going to find out when I talk about HCl later, that that's irregular. So if you have a color scheme where you're actually trying to model human color perception to create a precise a spherical geometric shape, or even sort of a cube, is incorrect in terms of how we see color. So here I show you the chroma scale from Muntzel's experiments. Now it turns out at the region of 5, most of those are some strong, we are all about at that region of 5. But once we get out further, we see a larger range of red than we do blue. Okay, now I want to jump into something called the non-uniform and uniform rainbow color spectrum. Tamara mentioned earlier about non-perceptual uniformity in a color map. The top non-perceptual uniform color map is what they call the rainbow color map. So this goes all the way back to Newton. And this is what was actually used in early visualization systems. This particular color map was put into even back to VTK in its very, very early stages. You'll find that it had a color map that was non-uniform. People like Bernice Rogowitz and Lloyd Treinish noted that this could be very misleading. And some of the examples Tamara was showing you is actually from Bernice's early work. The color scheme could mislead your data. In other words, you would have features of the color map that were not the actual changes in your data. In a medical environment, that would mean that you could come up with some conclusions about tumors that might not be correct if you looked at this, if you put a rainbow color map across there. So here I actually created a perceptual uniform color map of the rainbow system so you could see what the difference would be without any artifacts. This was done by hand. This is not automatically generated. So if we compare it with other color maps, I want to show you some work that's from Borland and Taylor that wrote in 2007. They analyzed IEEE Viz papers and showed the rainbow color map is still being used. Look at this target going down. If you look at the target, notice that if you use a black and white color map, you will not see those differences. If you go down here, so you can see the color map is affecting the differences that you're seeing in your data. And this is why it is so important with regards to its use. So you have to be careful here. Now, let's go a little bit more and let's review some color vision principles so we can understand how it is, how we're seeing data, how the human vision system works. So I'm going to talk about trichromatic color theory, opponent processing color theory, the coexistence of the two, and color deficiency. Historically, trichromatic and opponent were 2 different theories, but eventually it was shown that they actually work together. So Thomas Young was the first one to postulate that we had 3 different photoreceptors in our eyes. Helmholtz was the one to verify it, and he showed that we have long preferring, which is red, medium preferring, which is green, and short preferring, which is blue. Now, it is important to remember here, we are not exactly like a display system where you have a red light, a green light, and a blue light. We, in terms of our cones, see a range. So when you say something is long preferring and it's red, it doesn't mean that the red light's not working. What it means is there's a range of color that we see with this long preferring cone. There's a range of green and a range of blue. This becomes very interesting in terms of trying to incorporate this concept into color deficiencies. Now, let's think of another situation here, and that is, it's not just going into your eyes. Light is not just going into your eyes, and that's how you see color. It turns out the optic nerve gets involved with this, and it goes up into your brain. And Harry was the first person to notice this, and he defined a concept called opponent processing. Now, hang with me here. He said that in this world, we didn't go out and see red versus green light. For most of this is a little hard, this one, blue versus yellow light, because most of us learn color in kindergarten with paints, and we know that blue and yellow combined will give us green paints, but it will not in terms of light. You don't see blue versus yellow mixtures of them, and you don't see red versus green mixtures of them. So he showed that there was actually a 4-color primary system, and he was calling it opponent color theory. Now, Helmholtz challenged Harry a great deal and said the guy was crazy. It would not be until the 1950s when Kodak was trying to deal with what was really going on with regards to their camera culture that they had some scientists, Herbich and Jameson. They showed that actually, indeed, we see trichromatically, but there is an effort in the brain where we have hue cancellation. Red and green lights in our brain mixed together produces yellow. And you can actually do this in some experiments with yourself. If you shine red and green lights together simultaneously, your brain will tell you it's yellow, even though you know that there's 2 red and green lights shining together. So you never get reddish green. Blue and yellow lights mixed together is going to give you white. Now think about it. If we calculate it, red, green, blue, yep, that gives us white light. So blue and yellow is going to give you white light as well. So they showed in their experiments that what can happen is if you take a yellow light and you mix it with a bluish green light, you will eventually get green. This is most challenging for us because we learn about color initially in our lives with paints, and it's hard for us to convert it over to learning about color with lights. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the red, yellow, blue primary color scheme, and I'm going to show you what happens sometimes when people are looking at paintings. This can happen when people are in museums. Protonope is a situation where the red photoreceptor is absent. So what's happening is you're not seeing red and green equally in the same, actually you're seeing them quite equally, but you're not seeing the color. What you're seeing them is kind of a yellowish, grayish kind of combination. Now where this really shows up is there are a lot of people that produce visualizations where they have green and orange, and people cannot tell actually what's going on in the visualization. Deuteranope is the green photoreceptor being absent. Tridanope is a much smaller population, has this long cone, short cone not being present, where the blue cone is not functioning properly. Now, what does this mean with your visualization? So you produce this cool bubble chart, and it turns out that people can't see the difference between the bubbles. They can't differentiate. So what you do is you, what I call double coded. You put text on each one of those bubbles so that people not only have to refer to have 2 channels to refer to the visualization. They can refer to it by the color, and they can refer to it by the text. This is one of the easiest ways to solve a color deficiency. So this is an example that I showed you here. So what I'm telling you is just because you got the color harmony perfect, you might fail color deficiency. I used a color blindness simulator called Coblis. It's freely available to you, color blindness simulator, Coblis. You can get on the web, you can put any of your images in through it, and it will show you what it looks like, or a computational simulation of what it looks like if you have one of these color deficiencies. Now I want to talk about some color spaces. The International Commission on Illumination developed these color spaces. Your cell phone and my cell phone are not calibrated the same. It turns out if we're in RGB color space, we don't have a common color space. Each one is individually different. And there's a lot of calibration that goes into developing mobile devices as well as display devices. Now the Color Commission on Illumination decided to come up with independent color spaces that did not depend on the device that you had. In 1931, they came up with a color space called CIE-XYZ, based on the experimental perception test, kind of like what Munsell did much earlier. Then it was shown that this 1931 space was heavy on the green side. If you look at it real quick, it's a lot more green. It was shown that that was not a perceptually uniform color space. There's a thing called McAdams ellipses. I don't have time to go into it right now, but it shows you on this particular, this is color spectrum right across in here. It shows you how people were not seeing it perceptually uniform. They came up with CIE Love and CIE Lab. Both of these were released simultaneously. Love was intentionally meant for display devices, and Lab was meant for actually like things like textiles and those types of color situations, and also printout devices. Today, a lot of people use CIE Lab because we have the computational power to use the model. A lot of people use that in terms of display color models. So how do you do this kind of color mimicry situation? Well, you have to pass a test that says you don't have a color deficiency. Then they put a test lamp in front of you, and you have some knobs, RGB knobs, and you basically are going to match to that same test lamp. And there's a whole lot of procedures for adjusting. I'm showing you this because basically a lot of this color perception is based on very much subjectivity. There are definite rules about it, but it's very subjective as to who's looking at the color and testing it. Okay, so Hue Chroma Luminance is an effort to get an even better perceptually uniform color space. So I told you that CIE Love and CIE Lab were determined to be perceptually uniform. But it turns out that if you do a cylindrical transformation, you will get these odd looking shapes. Munsell was right over 100 years ago. Indeed, it is not a geometrically beautiful shape, but you will get a color space that Hue is defining it. That is your color dominant wavelength. Chroma is the intensity, and luminance is the amount of gray. Now, yesterday, Tomorrow talked about chroma luminance, but there is an HCl color space that is gaining popularity and being used a lot in the visualization community. So what is the visual difference? So I'm showing you the RGB color wheel here. So that's the Newtonian color map or the rainbow color map. And then I'm showing you the HCl color wheel. You'll see if we transfer that information into a grayscale, you'll see that there's less differentiation when we're in HCl. It's almost very, very close to uniform across there. And this is what you want. That's what perceptual uniformity is about. So now, just because you got perceptual uniformity, that does not mean someone who has color deficiency is going to be able to see the differences in your color space. So you're perceptually uniform, but you can still have a color deficiency. So I show you the color wheel across here, sent through the Copeless and color deficiency test. So how do you deal with perceptual uniformity? Well, you could deal with Color Brewer, you'd be safe. There are some other tools that are just emerging. They're called Color Picker for Data, iWantHue, and HCL Wizard. Those tools they're very much in the research scale. Today, probably the most strongest industrial strength tool for creating a color scheme is Adobe Color. It's been around a long time, as well as there's some tools called Pantone Connect. I put them in the Discord channel. I put those tools in advance if you want to go back and look at them. Those are the two, what I would call industrial strength tools for creating color schemes that are done by graphic designers. This includes somebody like Michael Kors, who's designing his latest fashion designs. He's using Pantone Connect. In Adobe Color, you've got people who are basically Photoshop experts. They use Adobe Color as the basis for how they're doing their color schemes. But if we're in data visualization, we're looking for perceptual uniformity. So we want to maybe use another tool. Color Picker for Data can do it. iWantHue and HCL Wizard. So now I want to give you some 10 simple rules to colorize your biological data. First one, identify the nature of your data. We've had a lot of talks this symposium at the school where we talked about how to identify the nature of your data. That's your first rule. Select the color space you want to be in. So if you want to go with perceptual uniformity, you might choose Munsell and maybe go with Color Brewer. You might choose Hue Chroma Luminance, or you might not care at all about that and stay in RGB color space. You are charged with making the next Pixar film, and you decide that you want to stay in a color space that RenderMan is going to give you vivid color. You want to stay in that color space. But if you're in data visualization, maybe you want to go with HCL. You're going to create a color palette based on the selected color space. So that could be that selected color space. Remember, I was telling you, you could have a sequential color palette. You could have a analogous color scheme, like I talked about a little earlier. You could have a diverging color scheme. You could have a qualitative color scheme. You're going to apply the color palette to your data set to see what you get for your visualization. You're going to check the context of your color. A lot of presentations here had talked about conventions in biomedical visualization, certain conventions that exist, and maybe certain color maps wouldn't work so well. But you want to check your color context after it's applied. You want to evaluate the interactions of your colors in your data. That was the example I talked about earlier, where if you have two hues and you got some incredible vibrating colors, maybe the interaction isn't going so good. You want to be aware of your color conventions, definitions in your particular discipline. Again, I talked about that. There's particular domain experts have established conventions with regard to their field. You want to assess color deficiencies. You always want to do that. I have the practical experience of creating work at the Environmental Protection Agency on Lake Erie's pollution, creating a beautiful movie, having my scientist look at it and tell me he couldn't see it. That's right, he couldn't see the movie at all because he was red-green colorblind, and I had this beautiful map that changed over time with a green graph and a magenta line. So I had to change the magenta line to a blue line so that he could see it. Consider your web content accessibility and your print realities. If you know you're going to go into a publication that they're really doing black and white, what's the next rule? You're going to get it right in black and white. And I think actually this was covered in the Mentoring Visualization Designs talk. He was really saying, get it right in black and white first. Spend your time getting it right in black and white, and then go into color. So this actually concept has been covered before. So I am indebted to the Data Visualization Society, and I'm indebted to a lot of readers who have taught me a lot about color. I recently wrote a book that was noted in my introduction called Applying Color Theory to Digital Media and Visualization. Well, if you call 216 to be recent, I wrote that. So here I show in this book various color schemes and how to use apps like Adobe Color, Pantone Studio, Color Brewer, Color Scheme Designer. I take you through them. Now, I turn out to be very active right now in that I'm writing for the Data Visualization Society. Their journal is called Nightingale. I'm actively producing, and I'm really indebted to George Hattef and Mary Aviles for editing my work and making it better than I ever thought it would be. And I'm not joking with you. I'm going to tell you why I'm not joking, because I'm going to escape, and you're going to see an article. It came out today. Whoop! You would if I was clever enough as clever. Well, this is going to be fun, and this is being recorded. Let's see if I can go to Medium and get my latest article. What do you think? You think I can do it? All right, so now we're going to go find me. This is how you're going to find all my articles. This is a wonderful thing. You're about to see all the articles I've written. My latest one is not up here because it came out today at 9 a.m. So now we're going to go to Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time. So now we're going to go right here. Here it is, color in a perceptual uniform way. It was just May 20th. That would be today. And it was published at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So if you read this article, you'll see my current thinking on perceptual uniformity. And I describe, you recognize these slides right across in here, and I describe the situation in detail. I have some other articles that I plan to get out really soon. So that's where to keep track of me. And I thank everyone for listening to me. Thank you. So let's see if I can be clever as clever and stop my screen sharing. That I might not be able to be clever as clever to do, because that would require me to hit the button that says stop sharing. Okay, I'm ready to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. There are actually several questions coming in. So I will start with the first one. Sidewall is asking, have you discussed these color spaces with painters or artists? Do they view color in a different way? And if so, then how?
Yes, with painters, yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, I'm an artist myself. Painters use the red, green, and blue, and red, yellow, blue. Most painters use the red, yellow, blue for mixing paints. If I were giving you a full-length course, I would show you Monet paintings. I would use a tool called Adobe Capture and show you how you can go to a museum and take a picture of an image in the museum, transfer it across, and get the actual color palette of painter designs. Yes, I did. Yes, indeed, I have shared it. Now, what I've shown you in this talk was in terms of if you were doing data visualization, but I'm very active in the color community. And yes, I do deal with artists. Next question.
Thank you very much. So Laura is asking that with the most publication read online nowadays, even though that they are still designed for print, when we export figures, for example, from Illustrator, does it make sense to work with CMYK or RGB color spaces?
Well, that's kind of an interesting situation. The way it works in terms of printing, again, in a full-length course, I described that. It turns out that CMYK, as we said, is faded. What printers have used for years is that's how a company called Pantone came into being. What you do to get your color back in a color printing is you don't go into CMYK, you add inks to the printing process. That's why color for a long time was always considered very expensive. So you would add your Pantone inks to the color printing process and get your vivid colors back. Now, there's some people that want to stay in that particular color space. And the reason they want to do that, and with Pantone, is because if you're going into something other than the visualization, we're dealing with displays and primarily printing, but you could be dealing with fabric and textiles. You could actually be dealing with makeup. You can be dealing with lots of different, trying to transfer color from your design, the digital design, into a medium that is going to be completely different. So if you're going to stay in the digital world, you could stay in RGB pretty safely if you go in there, but you're still going to run into what I talked about, the perceptual uniformity. You're still got, especially in your medical imaging, you're still going to run into a situation where you're staring at colorized, maybe, I'm going to use tumors, just an example all day, and it's going to wear on your eyes. And if you had a perceptual uniform color map, it would be less stressful on your eyes. And that's the reason actually I covered that here. So what you're doing is by going with perceptual uniformity, you're having less stress on your eyes. Okay, so I hope I answered that somewhat.
You also actually partially answered the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway in case you would want to add something to it. So Alexander is asking that you have mentioned the difficulties of designing something in RGB. So for example, printing, it's having it look a bit differently, but do you know a good way that helps to avoid that?
How to design in RGB, you mean? Wait a minute, how did it help? Take me back again.
So the question is whether you can avoid somehow the problems when designing something in RGB when you want to print it out and it looks differently.
Yeah, I mean, what you're gonna do is actually, if you use a tool like Adobe Photoshop, it turns out Adobe has its own color model. So transparently, you can transfer between RGB and CMYK color spaces automatically. You can transfer that equally in terms of, well, actually, if you use Adobe Color that I was telling you about, Adobe Color will tell you what the values are if you're in CMYK or if you're in an RGB color space. And if you have to print out in color, it will even recommend to you the Pantone colors to use. So if I were going to do something that I'm not talking like visualization, I'm talking sort of like print production, I would use Adobe Color. That's what I would do. I hope I answered that question. That's a complex question, by the way. It may not appear to you guys to be complex, but when you get into, when you start wading in the water and stuff like that, it gets very complicated because it's an expense factor. The more inks that you add to a color printing process, the more the expense associated with producing the document, and your boss who is watching the budget may not approve what you do. And I want to give you an example. I'm going to diverge for a second. Henri Matisse, someone asked me about artists. Henri Matisse was clever as clever. Here's why. when the last period of his life, he had suffered a stroke and he was using cutouts. He was cutting out from pieces of paper to create his book called Jazz, and to create his last visualizations. I call them, it's art, but his last visualization. He used construction paper that was cyan, magenta, and yellow, astutely aware that if somebody reproduced them, the colors would work out beautifully. Go and look more carefully at Matisse's color palette that he did with his construction paper, and you will see he matched to CMYK very early. So artists have understood this very carefully. Another palette I'll give you really carefully, Monet. We all love his light colors and everything. What he did, how he did it, was he had a glob of white and he painted plein air. Plein air means he didn't look at a photograph or he didn't analyze, he painted what he saw at the moment he had his easel set up. But he had moved with a center amount of white, and then he added his colors later. And that he brought out the color from pastels all the way through, but he knew what he was doing. He had tremendous control of his color. Okay, any more questions? And that's what you want to do in your visualization, by the way. You want to have tremendous control of your color. Okay, yes.
So we are heading slowly towards the social event, but I think there is no intense discussion within the social event. So I think we can take one or two more questions. And the next one is by Renata Raidu, and she's actually asking a quite interesting question, is that how do you deal with the domain conventions that you actually do not agree with much? So for example, in clinics, the rainbows are everywhere and you cannot really move the clinicians out of them. So how would you educate them to not to use the rainbows and convince them to shift to something else?
Well, now it's funny because I have actually walked that path, and I was dealing with people who were professionals who liked red, green, and they liked blue, yellow. And I developed a color scheme that was green, purple. And it turns out it took a while, but you will start to see, you're starting to see green and purple appear more in Science magazine, because you still have a diverging color scheme, you have a complementary color scheme, but you no longer have the color deficiency. So it can be, what you have to do is you have to get someone who's a very prolific and powerful writer to agree to it. They start publishing and people steal. We don't like to admit it, but people steal or people emulate very successful, other successful people. And that's how you can create the change. You have to demonstrate it. I wouldn't argue it, but you have to demonstrate it. By the way, I also have learned another thing over the years is just because I don't like a color map doesn't mean it's not a good color map. I might not like it, but maybe I have to grow myself. Maybe I have to learn the other colors and conventions in other fields to become accustomed to it. All right, next question.
Okay, so the last one, just a moment. The last is asked by Florian, and some time ago he stumbled across a color space HSLUV. However, he could not decide whether it was worth using or not. So do you know about it? And if you yes, can you comment on it?
All right, if you're talking about HSL, I'm not sure what you.
So it is HSLUV. So it's some kind of a different space. Maybe he posted a link to the Discord channel.
Okay, if somebody can post it here. I will tell you what HSL is, though. Hue saturation lightness. There's two color systems that are fundamental and developed and published in 1978 in computer graphics. I did not cover them. Hue saturation value and hue saturation lightness. And hue saturation lightness, by the way, is a double cone visualization system. The reason you want to know that one is because if you specify colors in HSL and you put it in a web page, the web consortium allows you to specify directly in the HSL values rather than in web hex values. So you can get more exotic colors in your web pages if you use that. Hue saturation value is what has been used for a long time as the color pickers in terms of when you're in a display system. In other words, you know, like when you're on the Apple and it brings up that little color wheel and you can pick colors, it's primarily using hue, saturation, and value. Those are two historic ones in computer graphics. I don't know this other particular color system right off the top of my head, but those are two I did not cover here in this talk because I had to minimize my slides. I hope I helped here some.
Yeah, so I think that was the last question. So thank you very much again for this amazing words. There is many more comments of appreciation within the Discord channel. So
okay,
we appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm going to post my slides, and which I have as an animation on YouTube, and I'm going to post the URL of my latest article. I'm indebted to Nightingale for putting it out today. So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity.